The wooden crate wasn't supposed to be there. Hana Tanaka noticed it the moment she stepped into the abandoned schoolhouse that served as her makeshift shelter in the ruins of post-war Tokyo. The box sat in the corner where she usually kept her carefully rationed rice, completely out of place among the debris and broken furniture that decorated her temporary home. The American occupation had brought many unexpected things to Japan since the surrender 6 months ago, but mysterious boxes appearing in locked rooms wasn't among the usual disruptions. She approached cautiously, her worn shoes making soft sounds against the dusty floorboards. The crate bore military markings she couldn't read, stamped in that bold English lettering that now appeared everywhere throughout the city. Her heart hammered as she knelt beside it, fingers trembling as they traced the rough wood. In these uncertain times, anything connected to the occupation forces could mean trouble or opportunity, and distinguishing between the two often proved impossible, until too late. The lid wasn't nailed shut. That detail struck her as odd immediately. Military supplies typically arrived sealed tight, secured against the chaos of supply lines stretching across the Pacific. This box opened with minimal effort, the hinges creaking softly as she lifted the top. Inside, cushioned by straw and cloth, sat something that made absolutely no sense in this context. A rocking horse. Not just any rocking horse, but an elaborate one with a genuine leather saddle. Painted eyes that seemed almost alive and a mane made from actual horsehair. The craftsmanship spoke of American abundance, that casual excess she'd witnessed in the occupation, soldiers who seemed to have everything while her country starved. Before you continue with Hana's discovery, if you're finding this story compelling, please consider subscribing and leaving a like. Your support helps us bring more untold stories from history to light. We appreciate you being here. Hana sat back on her heels, mind racing through possibilities. Children's toys had become rare as dreams in Tokyo. Most families had burned their wooden possessions for heat during the final winter of the war, and the few toys that survived often got traded for food during the desperate months that followed. This horse represented wealth she couldn't begin to calculate, but more importantly, it represented a puzzle. Who would leave such a thing here? And why? The sound of boots on gravel outside froze her in place. Heavy footsteps, the distinctive rhythm of military-issue shoes against stone. She recognized that cadence after months of listening for it, learning to distinguish between patrol patterns and actual danger. These steps slowed as they approached her building, deliberate and purposeful rather than casual patrol movement. "Ma'am, you in there?" The voice carried through the broken window, speaking English with an accent she'd learned to identify as distinctly American, but with different qualities than the white soldiers who typically patrolled this sector. "Name's Sergeant James Morrison. I'm coming in, but I ain't here to cause trouble. I'm the one who left that box." Hana understood enough English to catch the meaning, though her ability to speak it remained limited. She watched the doorway as a tall black soldier entered, moving carefully, hands visible and empty. He wore the standard olive uniform, but carried himself differently than most occupation troops she'd encountered. There was a careful awareness in his movements, a consciousness of space and perception that spoke of someone accustomed to being watched and judged. "You found it, I see." Morrison nodded toward the open crate, his expression neutral, but his eyes assessing. "Before you get worried, this ain't some kind of trick or test, and I ain't expecting nothing in return, but we need to talk about what's really in that box, and why it might just save your life." She remained silent, watching him with the guarded wariness that had become second nature to every Japanese civilian navigating the occupation's complex social landscape. Interaction with American soldiers carried risks that varied wildly depending on circumstances, witnesses, and the particular attitudes of the individuals involved. Some soldiers showed genuine kindness, others brought different intentions entirely. Learning to read those differences quickly had become a survival skill. Morrison seemed to sense her hesitation. He moved to a broken chair, tested its stability, then sat carefully, reducing his height advantage. "I know you probably got no reason to trust an American soldier showing up unannounced, especially these days, with how some folks have been behaving." He chose his words carefully, acknowledging without directly stating the misconduct reports that had been quietly circulating through the occupation zones. "But I'm asking you to hear me out. Because there's people who notice this building ain't as empty as it looks, and not all of them got good intentions. The way he phrased it sent ice through her veins. She'd been so careful varying her schedule, entering and leaving through different routes, never making noise after dark. The schoolhouse sat in a bombed-out section that most people avoided, which had made it seem safe. Apparently that assumption had been dangerously wrong. "That rocking horse," Morrison continued, gesturing toward the crate, "it ain't just a toy. Well, it is, but it's also something else. Something that might look innocent enough that nobody questions why a woman living alone has it, but what's actually inside that horse is what matters." He paused, studying her face. "You speak English? Understand what I'm saying?" "Small understanding," she replied carefully, the words awkward on her tongue. "Continue, please." "Good, because we don't have much time, and I need you to understand exactly what's happening here." Morrison leaned forward, voice dropping lower. "There's a group of soldiers, not from my unit, who've been causing problems in this sector. They've been looking for places like this, isolated spots where civilians might be hiding valuables or supplies. Reports started coming in about harassment, intimidation, worse. Officers are aware, but investigations take time and enforcement ain't always what it should be." Hannah's stomach tightened. She'd heard whispers, fragments of stories passed between women at the ration distribution points. Some occupation troops had begun viewing the conquered territory and its people as sources of entertainment or profit, exploiting the power imbalance with varying degrees of aggression. Official channels existed for complaints, but accessing them required resources, connections and courage that most civilians lacked. Morrison pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket, smoothing it against his knee before extending it toward her. "This is a supply requisition form. Official, signed by a captain in logistics. It says you're authorized to receive one children's rocking horse as part of a civilian welfare program we're running for families affected by the bombing." He watched as she took the paper, examining the stamps and signatures that meant nothing to her beyond their apparent official nature. "You keep this visible, somewhere anyone entering this place would see it. That horse becomes your cover story." "Cover for what?" Hannah asked, her English struggling with the complexity of the question. "Why you help me, why you care?" The sergeant's expression shifted, something harder moving behind his eyes. "Because I know what it's like to be in a place where the people in charge don't see you as fully human, where the rules that are supposed to protect everybody somehow don't apply to you the same way." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I grew up in Georgia, ma'am. Jim Crow South. I know what occupation feels like from the other side, even if the circumstances are different. And I know what happens when good people decide that somebody else's problems ain't worth the trouble of getting involved." The honesty in his voice carried weight that transcended language barriers. Hannah had learned during the war that suffering created certain recognitions between people, ways of seeing and understanding that bypassed conventional communication. This soldier understood vulnerability from personal experience, not abstract sympathy. "Now here's what you need to know about that horse," Morrison continued, leaning back slightly. "The seat ain't solid. There's a hollow compartment under the saddle, accessed by pressing the right ear and lifting. Inside, I've packed some things that might prove useful. Canned rations, enough for 2 weeks if you're careful. Medical supplies, basic stuff but clean and American-made. And something else." He paused, watching her face. "There's a knife in there, good blade, sharp with a leather sheath. I ain't suggesting you go looking for trouble, and I surely hope you never need to use it. But if those soldiers I mentioned decide to come around when I ain't nearby, you've got options. You understand what I'm saying?" Hannah nodded slowly. The implications were clear enough, even through the language gap. He was providing her with defensive tools while creating legitimate cover for their presence. The official paperwork would deter casual inspection, while the hidden supplies would sustain her without requiring daily trips to ration centers where she might attract unwanted attention. "Why inside toy?" she asked, gesturing toward the horse. "Why not simple box?" "Because a box looks like something to steal," Morrison explained. "A toy, especially one with official paperwork, looks like charity. Looks like something that's supposed to be there, part of the occupation's humanitarian efforts. Most soldiers ain't gonna mess with items tied to official welfare programs, Not unless they're stupid enough to risk getting caught looting from civilians in a documented way. The logic made sense, though it raised new questions. You do this before? Help other people this way? Morrison's smile held no humor. Let's just say I've learned to work within the system when the system allows it, and around it when necessary. I've got access to supply forms that nobody questions too closely, and I've got relationships with folks in logistics who understand that sometimes the official story and the real story ain't quite the same thing. He stood, moving toward the window to check the street outside. You ain't the first person I've tried to help, and you probably won't be the last. Dangerous for you, Hannah observed, understanding now that his assistance came with significant personal risk. Soldiers who interfered with their comrades' activities, particularly when those activities involved occupied civilians, often faced social punishment or worse. Everything's dangerous these days, ma'am. Question is whether you're taking risks for something that matters or just following orders because thinking's harder. He turned back from the window, his expression serious. Now there's something else you need to understand. That horse weighs about 40 pounds with everything packed inside. Too heavy for you to move easily by yourself, so here's what you're going to do if trouble comes. He walked to the rocking horse, demonstrating as he spoke. You're going to sit on it right on the saddle like you were playing with it or examining it. Seems silly, I know, but hear me out. You sit on it with your full weight, and suddenly it ain't something that can be easily grabbed and carried off. It becomes furniture, essentially. Something they'd have to physically remove you from before taking. Hannah looked at the toy with new understanding. The instructions seemed absurd on its surface, but the tactical reasoning was sound. Making the object difficult to quickly seize could buy precious time, create complications that might discourage theft or worse. Just sit on it, Morrison repeated, his tone emphasizing the simplicity of the action. Don't argue, don't negotiate, don't explain. Just sit down calm and quiet, like it's the most natural thing in the world. Make them think twice about the effort required, about the scene it would cause, about the paperwork and questions that might follow if they force the issue. And if they not stop? Hannah asked quietly. Morrison's face hardened. Then you remember what's hidden inside, and you do what you need to do to survive, but it shouldn't come to that. I'm arranging for this sector to get more regular patrols, more oversight. Captain's already approved it, though he don't know exactly why I requested it. He checked his watch, a gesture that reminded Hannah of the time pressures governing this entire encounter. I need to leave before someone notices I've been here too long, but I'll be back, checking on things. You see me around, don't acknowledge it unless I speak first. Safer that way. After Morrison left, Hannah spent an hour examining the rocking horse with new eyes. The craftsmanship remained impressive, but now she understood it served purposes beyond decoration. She pressed the right ear as instructed, feeling the subtle click of a hidden mechanism. The saddle lifted smoothly, revealing the hollow compartment beneath. The supplies were packed with military precision. Cans labeled in English, their contents mysterious but promising. Bandages, antiseptic, pills whose purpose she could only guess. And there, wrapped in oiled cloth, the knife Morrison had mentioned. She lifted it carefully, feeling the balanced weight, testing the edge against her thumb with cautious respect. The blade caught the afternoon light filtering through the broken windows, sending a brief flash across the damaged walls. She'd never held a weapon before the war. Her father had been a teacher, her mother a seamstress, their lives defined by books and fabric rather than violence. The war had changed many things, but some innocences remained stubbornly intact, despite the surrounding destruction. Holding this knife felt like crossing a threshold she'd managed to avoid even during the worst of the bombing raids and their aftermath. The sound of voices outside made her replace everything quickly, lowering the saddle and ensuring it locked properly. She moved to the window, staying back from the opening, watching as a group of civilians passed by. They looked tired, defeated, carrying the weight of occupation and reconstruction in their posture and pace. Nobody looked up at her building. Nobody noticed her watching. The anonymity that had protected her continued holding for now. Night fell with the abrupt darkness of late autumn. Hannah rationed her candle carefully, allowing herself only enough light to prepare a small meal from the canned goods Morrison had provided. The food tasted foreign, overly sweet in unexpected ways, but the nutrition it offered exceeded anything available through official ration channels. She ate slowly, making the meal last, trying to remember when she'd last felt genuinely full rather than simply less hungry. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by the usual sounds of occupation, distant engines, occasional shouts, the general restlessness of a city learning to exist under foreign control. She'd grown somewhat accustomed to these sounds over the past months, developing a calibrated sense of which noises required attention and which could be safely ignored. The footsteps that woke her near midnight fell decidedly into the former category. Multiple people, moving without attempting stealth but not advertising their presence either. They stopped outside her building, voices carrying through the damaged walls with unclear intent. Hannah sat up carefully, heart accelerating, senses straining to interpret the situation before it revealed itself completely. Somebody's been using this place. The English words were slurred slightly, suggesting alcohol but not complete intoxication. Saw smoke from the chimney 2 days running. Means supplies, maybe food, maybe other things worth finding. Could just be squatters, a second voice responded, less certain. Place is pretty wrecked. Might not be worth the trouble. Only one way to find out. The first speaker sounded closer now, right outside the front entrance. Besides, if it's a woman alone like Jenkins thinks, might be entertaining either way. The casual cruelty in that statement sent ice through Hannah's veins. She moved quickly, quietly, to the rocking horse. Morrison's instructions echoed in her mind with new urgency. Just sit on it. She positioned herself on the saddle, feeling the solid weight of the hidden supplies beneath her, the concealed knife pressing through fabric against her leg. The door opened with a crash, either kicked or shouldered. 3 American soldiers entered, flashlights cutting through the darkness with aggressive sweeps. They weren't Morrison's unit. She could tell that immediately from their demeanor and the casual way they invaded her space. These men carried themselves with the entitled confidence of people accustomed to operating without meaningful consequences. Well. The lead soldier, a corporal based on his stripes, fixed his flashlight on her. Looks like Jenkins was right. You speak English, sweetheart? Understand what's happening here? Hannah remained silent, gripping the rocking horse beneath her, feeling the wood solid and steady. Her heart hammered, but she kept her face carefully neutral, remembering the survival lessons learned during air raids. Showing fear invited escalation. Maintaining composure sometimes created pause. I asked you a question. The corporal moved closer, his companions spreading out to flank him. They were performing a routine, she realized, a practiced intimidation that had probably worked many times before. You got any supplies in here? Food? Valuables? Anything that might belong to the occupation authority? Toy, Hannah said carefully, gesturing to the horse beneath her. From American program. Official. She wished Morrison had left the paperwork somewhere more immediately accessible, but reaching for it now would mean moving from the horse. The corporal's laugh held no warmth. Her official program, that's funny. Ain't heard of no program giving out toys to civilians. You trying to tell me stories? He directed his flashlight at the rocking horse, examining it with narrowed eyes. The beam caught the worn leather of the saddle, the carefully painted details, the overall quality that seemed incongruous with its surroundings. That's actually a pretty nice piece, one of the other soldiers observed, moving closer for a better look. Probably worth something back home. Real horsehair mane, leather saddle. My kid would love this. There you go, the corporal said, turning back to Hannah. My friend here likes your toy. Why don't you get up and let us take a closer look? We'll make sure it gets to a good home where it'll be appreciated. Hannah tightened her grip on the horse's mane, keeping her voice steady. No, is mine. Have paper. Official paper say this for me. Paper? The corporal's tone sharpened. Show me this paper. She pointed carefully toward the shelf where she'd placed Morrison's documents, not moving from her position. There. You look. You see as official. The third soldier, who had remained quieter than his companions, crossed to the shelf and retrieved the folded form. He examined it by flashlight, his expression shifting as he read. Actually, Corp, she ain't lying. This is signed by Captain Hendricks, dated 3 days ago. Says right here, civilian welfare distribution, 1 children's toy, authorized recipient. He squinted at the paper. Can't make out the name, but the stamp looks legit. The corporal's confidence wavered slightly. Let me see that. He snatched the paper, studying it with growing frustration. Official documentation complicated things, created potential complications if questions got asked later. Still, he wasn't quite ready to abandon the situation. Okay, so maybe it was issued officially. But how do we know you're the authorized recipient? Could be you stole this from somewhere else. Not stolen, Hannah insisted, her limited English forcing simple declarations. Mine. Given to me. You should go now. Should we? The corporal stepped closer, his posture aggressive. Thing is, we're the occupation authority here. We decide what's official and what ain't. And right now, I'm deciding I need to verify this situation more thoroughly. He reached toward her, hand extended to pull her from the horse. Hannah didn't move. Morrison's words echoed in her mind. Just sit on it. Calm and quiet. Make them think twice. She met the corporal's eyes without flinching, her hands tight on the horse, her entire body language communicating stubborn, absolute resistance. Come on, get up, the corporal demanded, his voice rising. I ain't got all night for this nonsense. No, Hannah said simply. The soldier who had read the paperwork shifted uncomfortably. Corp, maybe we should just leave this alone. The document looks legitimate, and if Captain Hendricks really authorized this, we could get jammed up for interfering with welfare distribution. Remember what happened to Peterson when he got caught taking civilian supplies? The corporal hesitated, clearly torn between his initial intentions and the growing complications. The silence stretched, tension building in the close space. Then footsteps sounded outside, distinct and purposeful. Well, this is interesting. Morrison's voice cut through the standoff with controlled authority. He appeared in the doorway, his posture relaxed, but his eyes hard. Gentlemen, didn't expect to find anyone from outside our patrol sector here this time of night. Care to explain what's going on? The corporal straightened reflexively, responding to Morrison's sergeant stripes, despite the racial dynamics that normally would have inverted that deference. Just checking on reports of unauthorized occupation, Sergeant, making sure everything's in order. Is that right? Morrison entered the room fully, his gaze moving deliberately from the soldiers to Hannah, still seated on the rocking horse, then back. Because from where I'm standing, it looks more like you're hassling a civilian who's got proper documentation for that toy there. Documentation I happen to know about because I'm the one who processed it through welfare distribution 3 days ago. The quiet soldier held up the paperwork. He's right, Corp, it's all legitimate. Morrison took the paper, examining it briefly before handing it back to Hannah with deliberate courtesy. Ma'am, I apologize for this disturbance. These soldiers are out of their assigned area and apparently not familiar with the welfare programs we've established in this sector. He turned to the corporal, his voice hardening. I suggest you and your men return to your proper patrol zone. Now, unless you'd prefer I file a report about this incident with Captain Hendricks, who takes civilian harassment pretty seriously. The corporal's face flushed with anger and humiliation, but he recognized the trap. Morrison had established civilian protection protocols that made interference legally problematic, while his relationship with the captain gave him leverage that transcended the usual racial hierarchy. Pushing further would create problems that weren't worth whatever they'd hoped to accomplish here. We're done here, the corporal muttered, gesturing to his companions. Come on. They filed out, footsteps heavy with resentment. Morrison waited until their sounds faded completely before speaking. You okay? He asked Hannah quietly. She nodded slowly, finally allowing herself to dismount from the rocking horse. Her legs trembled slightly, adrenaline aftermath making movement uncertain. You come very good time, she managed in English. Thank you. I've been keeping closer watch than you probably realized, Morrison explained. When I saw those 3 heading this direction, figured they might be the trouble I'd warned you about. He moved to the window, checking the street outside. They won't come back, not after tonight. But we need to make some adjustments to your situation here. Morrison pulled a second folded paper from his jacket, this one more elaborate than the first. I talked to Captain Hendricks today. Explained that we've identified several vulnerable civilians in this sector who might benefit from additional protection measures. He handed her the document. This is a formal designation letter, makes you an authorized civilian auxiliary to our welfare distribution program, means you've got official status, documentation that gives you legitimate reasons to interact with American personnel if needed. Hannah examined the paper, understanding perhaps half the English words, but recognizing the official seals and signatures that gave it weight. "This make me safe?" she asked doubtfully. "Safer," Morrison corrected. "Nothing makes anyone completely safe in occupied territory. But this gives you legal standing, means if someone bothers you, you've got clear channels to report it through, and those reports will be taken seriously because you're now part of an official program." He paused. "It also means you need to be more careful. Some soldiers won't like seeing a Japanese civilian with American documentation. Creates resentment, makes them feel like the lines are getting blurred in ways that challenge their assumptions." "Assumptions?" Hannah struggled with the word. "Their beliefs about who deserves respect and who doesn't," Morrison clarified. "Lot of soldiers over here think occupation means they can do whatever they want to conquered populations. Having documentation that says otherwise, that establishes you as someone with official protection, that challenges their worldview, makes some of them angry." Hannah absorbed this, recognizing the complex dynamics Morrison navigated daily. He existed in an impossible position, a black soldier trying to enforce protection policies while serving in a military that often didn't fully extend those same protections to him. The parallels between their situations weren't exact, but they shared certain fundamental recognitions about power, vulnerability, and the selective application of justice. "Why you do this?" she asked again, needing to understand the motivation that drove such risk-taking. "You have nothing gain, only danger." Morrison settled onto the broken chair again, his expression contemplative. "You ever hear of the Tuskegee Airmen?" When Hannah shook her head, he continued. "They're black pilots, some of the best flyers in the whole Army Air Forces. Had to fight like hell just for the right to fly combat missions, prove themselves over and over again, all while dealing with people who didn't think they belonged in cockpits." He paused. "One of those pilots, my cousin James, he wrote me a letter a few months back, said something that stuck with me." He pulled a worn envelope from his pocket, unfolding a letter with obvious handling. He wrote, "We're fighting two wars, Jimmy. One against the enemy abroad and one against the assumptions at home that say we're not good enough, not smart enough, not brave enough. Every mission we fly challenges those assumptions. Every enemy plane we shoot down proves them wrong. But the real victory won't come from any individual achievement. It'll come from changing the system that makes us fight so hard just to be seen as equal." Morrison refolded the letter carefully. "That's why I do this. Because systems don't change themselves. They change when people inside them decide that fairness matters more than comfort, that protecting the vulnerable matters more than maintaining convenient fictions about who deserves protection and who doesn't." He looked directly at Hannah. "You're vulnerable not because of anything you did, but because of circumstances beyond your control. Same as me, in different ways. Seems to me that creates an obligation. If I'm going to claim I'm fighting for freedom and justice, and all those other words we use to justify this war." The honesty in his words transcended language barriers. Hannah understood on a fundamental level that Morrison saw something in her situation that resonated with his own experiences of discrimination and selective justice. His assistance wasn't charity. It was solidarity born from parallel struggles against systems that reduced people to categories rather than individuals. "You are good man," she said simply, the limited English inadequate for the complexity of what she wanted to express. "Thank you, I not forget." Morrison stood, checking his watch. "I need to get back before someone notices I've been gone too long. But I want you to understand something important." He moved to the rocking horse, running his hand along its mane. "This horse, this silly toy, it's become something bigger than either of us intended. It's proof that sometimes the most important resistance isn't dramatic. Sometimes it's just sitting still, holding your ground, refusing to be moved." He demonstrated again, briefly sitting on the horse himself, his weight settling it firmly against the floor. "Just sit on it," he repeated, the phrase taking on layers of meaning. "Don't let anyone move you from what's rightfully yours. Don't let anyone make you believe you don't deserve basic dignity and safety. And don't let anyone convince you that protecting yourself means you're the problem." The following days brought subtle changes to Hannah's circumstances. Morrison arranged for her to receive official ration cards through his welfare program, reducing her exposure at the main distribution centers where harassment had become increasingly common. He also orchestrated an increase in patrol frequency through her sector, though careful not to make it obvious that any particular building received special attention. Other soldiers from Morrison's unit began appearing periodically, usually during daylight hours. They brought small gifts, always official enough to justify their presence: extra blankets from supply surpluses, cooking fuel requisitions, occasionally food items that had been earmarked for civilian welfare. Each visit followed the same pattern: brief, professional, documented, leaving no room for misinterpretation about the nature of the assistance. Through these interactions, Hannah's English improved gradually. She learned practical phrases, military terminology, enough vocabulary to handle basic exchanges without Morrison's translation. The soldiers who visited treated her with consistent respect, their behavior modeling the kind of occupation conduct Morrison advocated for, but couldn't always enforce more broadly. "How's the toy holding up?" a young private named Davis asked one afternoon, setting down a box of canned goods. He'd been one of the soldiers who'd started checking on her regularly, part of Morrison's informal network of personnel, who understood that occupation required more nuance than simple military authority. "Horse is good," Hannah replied, gesturing toward where the rocking horse sat in its corner. "Very strong, very useful." Davis smiled at the coded language they'd developed. "Glad to hear it. Sergeant Morrison wanted me to let you know that there's been some redeployment. Some of the soldiers who were causing problems in this sector, they've been reassigned to different areas. Should be quieter around here for a while." The news brought relief, mixed with caution. Reassignment didn't necessarily mean accountability, just redistribution of potential problems. Still, it represented progress of a sort, evidence that Morrison's advocacy had achieved at least temporary results. "Sergeant Morrison is good leader," Hannah observed. "Other soldiers respect him?" Davis's expression became more complicated. "It's mixed. Morrison's really capable, probably the best sergeant in our company for handling civilian relations and logistics. Captain Hendricks knows that, gives him a lot of authority because of it." He paused, choosing words carefully. "But some soldiers, they don't like taking direction from a black NCO, no matter how competent he is. They follow orders because they have to, but the respect ain't always there the way it should be." Hannah understood the dynamics he described, recognizing them from her own observations. Morrison operated in a constant state of having to prove himself more thoroughly than white soldiers at equivalent ranks. His authority perpetually questioned in ways that reflected broader prejudices rather than his actual capabilities. "That is not right," she said firmly, her English sufficient for simple moral declarations. "Good work should be respected. Color of skin should not matter for this." "You'd think," Davis agreed. "But the world doesn't always work the way it should. Morrison deals with it better than most people could. He just focuses on doing his job, helping people who need help, and building relationships with the folks who can see past their prejudices." He stood to leave. "Anyway, I should get back. You need anything else before I go?" "No, thank you for visiting. Thank you for bringing supplies." The formal courtesy had become part of their routine, maintaining the professional fiction that these were official welfare checks rather than protective surveillance. After Davis left, Hannah sat by the window, watching the afternoon light paint shadows across the ruined cityscape. Tokyo's destruction remained profound, entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble and ash, but signs of reconstruction were beginning to emerge. New structures rising from the ruins, people slowly rebuilding lives from whatever pieces survived the war's devastation. The rocking horse sat in its corner, innocuous and constant. She'd grown fond of it in unexpected ways, this absurd toy that had become her shield and symbol. Morrison's strategy had proven remarkably effective. The horse's presence, backed by official documentation, created a zone of legitimacy around her situation that deterred casual interference. The hidden supplies beneath its saddle remained untouched, emergency resources she hadn't needed, but found comforting nonetheless. That evening brought an unexpected visitor. Captain Hendricks himself appeared at her door just before sunset, accompanied by Morrison and another officer she didn't recognize. The captain was a tall man in his 40s, carrying himself with the brisk efficiency of career military leadership. "Miss Tanaka," Hendricks said through Morrison's translation, "I wanted to personally verify the welfare program we've established in this sector. Sergeant Morrison has reported that you've been receiving appropriate support through our Civilian Auxiliary Initiative. Is that accurate? Hannah nodded, understanding that this visit served multiple purposes: genuine inspection of the welfare program, but also official validation of Morrison's activities and her documented status. Yes, very helpful. Very kind. Hendricks examined the rocking horse with obvious interest. That's the distribution item Sergeant Morrison processed. Quite impressive for a welfare program toy. We occasionally receive donated items from various sources, sir, Morrison explained smoothly. This particular piece came from a supply shipment that included some higher quality items intended for officer quarters, but I thought it would serve better as part of our civilian outreach. Helps build goodwill with the local population. The captain nodded slowly, recognizing the careful politics in Morrison's explanation. Innovative thinking, Sergeant. That's why I value your input on civilian affairs. He turned back to Hannah. Miss Tanaka, you understand that your auxiliary status comes with certain expectations. You'll be asked to help with translation occasionally, assist with communication between occupation forces and local civilians, serve as a liaison where language barriers create problems. I understand, Hannah replied carefully. I help when I can. The auxiliary designation evolved from protective fiction into practical reality over the following weeks. Hannah found herself called upon periodically to assist with civilian interactions, her improving English and documented status making her useful for bridging cultural and linguistic gaps. The work brought unexpected benefits, increased legitimacy, expanded social networks, and access to resources that would have been impossible without official standing. Morrison orchestrated these opportunities carefully, ensuring they fell within appropriate boundaries and never exposed Hannah to excessive risk. She translated at food distribution centers, helped resolve disputes between civilians and military personnel, occasionally assisted with processing welfare applications from other vulnerable residents. Each task reinforced her official position while building relationships that strengthened her safety through visibility and community integration. You've become quite effective at this, Morrison observed one afternoon after she'd successfully mediated a conflict between an American soldier and a Japanese shopkeeper over alleged theft. Captain Hendricks mentioned that you've got a natural talent for finding middle ground, helping both sides understand each other's perspectives. Is not so hard, Hannah replied, her English now significantly improved through constant use. Most people, they want same things: respect, safety, fairness. Language and culture make it difficult to see this sometimes, but underneath is same human needs. Morrison smiled at the observation. That's more wisdom than most career diplomats manage. You ever think about doing this kind of work more formally? Once things settle down, once we transition from occupation to something more cooperative, there's going to be serious need for people who can bridge these divides. The suggestion opened possibilities Hannah hadn't seriously considered. Survival had consumed her thinking for so long that planning beyond immediate needs seemed almost frivolous. But Morrison was right that circumstances were gradually shifting. The occupation's initial chaos was giving way to more structured relationships, and people with her particular combination of skills and experience would likely prove valuable. Maybe, she allowed, first must survive now. Future can wait until present is more secure. Fair point, Morrison conceded. Though I'd argue that building toward the future is part of securing the present. Every connection you make, every person who sees you as valuable rather than vulnerable, that's investment in long-term stability. Their conversation was interrupted by Davis rushing up, his usual casual demeanor replaced by obvious urgency. Sergeant, we've got a situation developing at the East Checkpoint. Group of Japanese civilians, maybe 20 or 30, gathered to protest new ration restrictions. Some of our guys are getting aggressive with crowd control, and it's escalating fast. Captain wants you there immediately. Morrison's expression hardened. This is exactly what we've been trying to avoid. Come on. He glanced at Hannah. You want to help with this? Could use someone who speaks both languages and understands both perspectives, but only if you're comfortable. Situations like this can turn dangerous quickly. Hannah hesitated only briefly before nodding. I help. Is my people also. Maybe I can make difference. They rushed through the damaged streets toward the checkpoint, arriving to find a tense standoff in progress. Japanese civilians, mostly women and elderly people, had formed a line blocking the checkpoint entrance. Their protest was quiet but absolute, bodies creating a human barrier while maintaining non-violent posture. American soldiers stood opposite, clearly uncertain how to proceed, while a lieutenant shouted orders that only seemed to increase confusion. "What's the situation?" Morrison demanded, addressing the lieutenant with appropriate respect for rank but unmistakable authority in crisis management. "These people are blocking checkpoint access, Sergeant. I've ordered them to disperse multiple times, but they're not responding. If they don't move in the next 5 minutes, I'm authorizing physical removal." "Hold that order, sir," Morrison said carefully. "Let me try something first. Give me 10 minutes to attempt peaceful resolution before escalating to force." The lieutenant looked skeptical but nodded. 10 minutes. But if they're still here after that, we're clearing the area by whatever means necessary." Morrison turned to Hana. "Can you find out what they want? Why they're protesting now?" Hana moved toward the crowd, speaking in Japanese to the nearest protesters. The conversation flowed quickly, multiple voices overlapping as people explained their grievances. The new ration restrictions had reduced allocations to levels that made survival genuinely questionable, particularly for elderly residents without alternative resources. The protest wasn't defiance for its own sake. It was desperate communication from people who'd exhausted other channels. She translated the concerns to Morrison, who listened intently while his mind worked through possible solutions. "Okay," he said finally, "here's what we're going to do. Tell them I acknowledge their concerns, and I'm going to arrange an immediate meeting with Captain Hendricks to review the ration policy. But they need to clear the checkpoint now, peacefully, to allow that meeting to happen. If they're still blocking access when the captain arrives, it'll make negotiation impossible, because he'll have to respond to the security situation first." Hana conveyed this to the crowd, adding her own credibility to Morrison's promise. Her documented auxiliary status and known relationship with the captain gave her words weight. The protesters conferred briefly before their apparent leader, an elderly man with obvious community authority, nodded agreement. "We will move," he said in halting English, directing his words to Morrison. "But you must keep promise. We cannot live on these new rations. Our children, our elders, they will starve." "I understand, sir," Morrison replied respectfully. "I'll make sure Captain Hendricks hears your concerns directly. You have my word." The crowd dispersed gradually, maintaining dignity in their withdrawal. The American soldiers relaxed as the immediate crisis diffused, though tension remained palpable. The lieutenant approached Morrison with grudging respect. "Nice work, Sergeant. How'd you manage that when they weren't responding to direct orders?" "Respect generally works better than force when you're trying to build cooperation rather than just enforce compliance, sir," Morrison replied diplomatically. "These folks aren't enemies. They're desperate people trying to survive under extremely difficult circumstances. Treating them accordingly makes resolution easier." Captain Hendricks arrived within the hour, summoned by Morrison's urgent request. The meeting occurred in a partially reconstructed building near the checkpoint, with Hana serving as translator between the captain, Morrison, and the elderly protest leader, whose name she learned was Takeshi Yamamoto. "Explain your concerns," Hendricks directed, his tone professional and attentive. Through Hana's translation, Yamamoto detailed the mathematics of survival under the new restrictions. The reduced rations provided insufficient calories for manual labor, inadequate nutrition for children's development, and potentially fatal shortages for elderly residents with medical conditions. He presented his case systematically, using numbers and specific examples rather than emotional appeals. Hendricks listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. When Yamamoto finished, the captain turned to Morrison. "Sergeant, you've been working civilian affairs in this sector. Does his assessment match your observations?" "Yes, sir. The new restrictions were designed to reduce overall supply burden, but they didn't adequately account for the fact that many civilians here have no alternative food sources. In the States, reduced government rations might mean people rely more on markets or gardens. Here, those alternatives don't exist yet. Infrastructure's too damaged, the economy's too disrupted." Morrison paused. We're basically asking people to survive on provisions that fall below subsistence level. Hendricks nodded slowly. I wasn't aware the situation had become this critical. The policy came down from higher headquarters with the assumption that local food production would supplement rations more than it apparently does. He looked back to Yamamoto. I can't change the policy unilaterally. That's above my authority. But I can request an emergency review and temporary suspension of the new restrictions until that review is complete. Will that address your immediate concerns? Through Hana's translation, Yamamoto responded, Yes, Captain. We ask only for what our people need to survive. We do not seek luxury, only sufficiency. Understood. Hendricks stood, extending his hand to Yamamoto in a gesture that transcended formal military-civilian boundaries. You have my commitment that I'll pursue this immediately. Sergeant Morrison will serve as liaison for any follow-up communication. If you have additional concerns or information that would help my case to headquarters, contact him and he'll make sure I receive it. The meeting ended with handshakes all around, a small ceremony of mutual recognition that felt significant despite its brevity. As Yamamoto departed, clearly pleased with the outcome, Hendricks turned to Morrison and Hana with an expression of thoughtful assessment. You two handled that situation remarkably well, he said. The protest could have turned violent if we'd proceeded with forced removal. Instead, we've got a potential policy improvement that'll benefit everyone involved. He paused. I'm recommending you both for commendations, Morrison for your civilian affairs work, and Miss Tanaka for your service as auxiliary translator. Your contributions deserve formal recognition. Thank you, sir, but that's not necessary, Morrison replied. We were just doing what needed doing. Which is exactly why it deserves recognition, Hendricks countered. Too much of military culture focuses on dramatic heroism, while ignoring the difficult daily work of building actual peace and stability. You're both demonstrating what effective occupation should look like, and I want that example documented and shared. He smiled slightly. Consider it an order, Sergeant. As they walked back toward Hana's building afterward, Morrison seemed unusually quiet, his expression contemplative. Never thought I'd be getting commendations for helping enemy civilians, he finally said. Whole situation's strange when you step back and think about it. Is not strange, Hana corrected gently. Is human. War creates enemies, but peace requires seeing people as people again. You do this naturally. Is why you are good at this work. Morrison glanced at the rocking horse when they reached her room, that absurd toy that had become symbolic of their entire arrangement. You know what's funny? When I first brought you that horse, it was just a practical solution to a specific problem. Way to hide supplies and create official cover. But it's become something bigger, hasn't it? Symbol of resistance through presence, protection through visibility, dignity maintained through small acts of stubborn persistence. Just sit on it, Hana quoted with a smile, understanding now how much meaning those simple words carried. Sometimes the best resistance is refusing to be moved from what's rightfully yours. Exactly. Morrison settled into his usual broken chair, the familiar furniture of their many conversations. I've been thinking about my cousin James and those Tuskegee airmen. They proved themselves through flying, through excellence that couldn't be denied. But the real victory was always going to be about changing the system that made them prove themselves in the first place. He paused. Same principle applies here. Individual acts of kindness are good, but the real work is establishing systems that make kindness normal rather than exceptional. You think Captain Hendricks will really change ration policy? Hana asked, recognizing that Morrison's broader goals required institutional buy-in beyond personal relationships. I think he'll try, which is more than most officers would do, Morrison replied. Hendricks is decent, sees the contradictions in current policy. But changing military bureaucracy from the inside is like trying to turn an ocean liner with a canoe paddle. Takes time, persistence, and usually more force than any individual can generate alone. The conversation was interrupted by Davis appearing at the door, slightly out of breath. Sergeant, sorry to interrupt, but Captain wants you back at headquarters. Apparently there's been some pushback on the ration policy review already. Someone higher up wants to know who authorized suspending the new restrictions, and it's getting political quickly. Morrison stood, his expression hardening with determination. Of course it is. Heaven forbid we let practical considerations interfere with bureaucratic convenience. He turned to Hannah. I might be tied up for a while dealing with this. You'll be okay here? I am okay, she assured him. You go. Do what you need to do. I have horse to sit on if trouble comes. The phrase had become their private shorthand for resilience and resistance. After they left, Hannah moved to the rocking horse, running her hand along its mane in the gesture that had become habitual. This silly toy, this unexpected gift, had transformed her circumstances in ways that transcended its simple physical presence. It represented possibility, connection, and the quiet power of refusing to be diminished by circumstances designed to enforce submission. She thought about Morrison's words regarding systems and change. Individual kindness mattered, created space for survival and dignity, but lasting transformation required more than personal charity. It required people like Morrison and Hendricks willing to use their institutional positions to challenge unjust policies, and people like herself willing to serve as bridges between divided communities. The work felt impossibly large sometimes, but then so had survival during the bombing raids. Somehow enough people doing impossibly difficult things created possibility where none seemed to exist. Maybe that was the real lesson of the rocking horse. Sometimes you couldn't avoid the situation entirely, couldn't make the danger disappear, could only sit firmly in place and refuse to be easily moved, trusting that stubborn presence would prove stronger than convenient force. Before the final chapter, if you found this story meaningful, please leave a like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. What small acts of resistance have you witnessed that made a big difference? Share your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. As evening settled over the damaged city, Hannah prepared a small meal from the supplies Morrison had provided, surrounded by the quiet debris of war's aftermath, sitting in the presence of her unlikely guardian, a simple toy that had become so much more than anyone intended when it first arrived in her broken shelter.